Welcome to the Also Joe podcast. I'm Joe.
And I'm also Joe.
This is our first recording in 3 years. We recorded a number of reviews and discussions in 2018. We've released the first of those recordings in 2 parts, our review of Justice League. We didn't like the rest of the recordings that we took, so we're trying again. We have some new recording equipment, so we appreciate everybody who's listening. Today, we're going to be discussing 2001's The Fast and the Furious. So a very timely, relevant conversation.
Oh yes. It brings us right into modern day. But it's interesting because as you're listening to this, the newest Fast 9, I'm not even sure what the title of it is. It might just be The Fastest and the Furious. I honestly don't remember what the name of it is, but that just released in theaters a month ago.
It's called F9. Internationally, it's called Fast and Furious 9. So before we talk about the film scene by scene, let's just talk general thoughts. I will say I was surprised. It's been a long time since I watched this movie. I really liked it. It was a lot better than I remembered.
Well, that is also trying to be a serious, not only action movie, but also an introduction into the underground racing scene, and it doesn't do a great job at that. But also, I will give it a lot of credit. Is that this movie is one of the reasons why I have such an interest in cars. At the time, I think it was 2001. Again, I was a sophomore in high school, so just got my driver's license. Friends are just driving. And that's who we saw the movie with, was a group of car friends, and there was a lot of hype around it. Wow, look at this racing. I'm sure it spewed a whole bunch of poor decisions behind the steering wheel for not only myself, but also teenagers around the world. But it's just part of the culture, I think.
Yeah, I thought it was a decent crime movie, and I thought the only parts that were questionable were actually the car parts. I thought if you took out all of the street racing elements, it was actually a pretty good movie.
I'm also ashamed to say how much I know about the movie, and I've watched numerous interviews with the actual development cast of it. More specifically, the R&D gentleman that was in charge of the car lingo and the cars in it as a whole, and listening to interviews that he's done and talking about things that he told them to put in the movie that were all accurate, and then what the studio said. You know what? People don't know what that means, so we're going to replace it with this, and this, and what you see in the actual final movie. So we'll talk about that a bit more.
Yeah, so a little setup. Joe, also known as Also Joe,
That's me,
is more knowledgeable when it comes to cars than I am. So I've recorded, or I've noted down, all of the vehicle technical commentary in this film. And we're going to, every time one of those scenes happens, we'll ask Joe to give his thoughts. So let's start with the opening scene. This is the very first truck hijacking.
Yes.
I thought this was a very cool scene. I thought most of the driving scenes, most of the non-street racing driving scenes were very well done.
It's kind of a setup to what the rest of the movies are. And I think in general, the rest of the movies just acknowledge, hey, you know what? People don't really care about racing. They care about cool scenes with cars. And this is the first movie that it's happened in. So
the only question I had about this scene was, why do they have green neon under the car? They have black cars, black outfits. They seem to be going for a stealth look, and then they make themselves very identifiable with green neon.
It's ridiculous and over the top, and there is no justifiable reason why there will be green neon on those vehicles other than to make it easier to identify to the police. Or perhaps if you want to think on the crime syndicate side of things, perhaps that was their calling card. Green neon underglow, precision driving, 3 Honda Civics, same MO as the others.
Drastic cut to Brian racing in a parking lot.
Yes.
I wasn't sure why he spun out, and that's kind of a question I have going over this whole film, which is, how do you become skillful in driving in a straight line faster? and I guess they're trying to portray that Brian is not very good at this by showing that going in a straight line him going in a straight line results in him spinning out of control wildly.
I don't know why they even bothered with that. I know that whole scene was to set up that the fact that his car needs some sort of improvement. So he was testing it, right? So they're saying, hey, go test. We're going to put this scene where Brian's testing his car, see how fast it can go. And he tops out and he's frustrated because he wants to win the street race against Toretto, improve his street value cred and his worth in the racing scene, right? But a couple things. So to speak to you, a question, because I can answer that, you would improve your skill in a straight line. In drag racing, your speed comes down to not only just the pure power of your car and numerous things that you do to your car as far as suspension, tires, et cetera, but reaction time off the starting line is huge, as well as just your ability to control the vehicle from the start. The start is what wins races most of the time, because vehicles will have the very comparable. A quarter mile race rarely comes down to just the raw power of the car. It very much comes down to, most times, unless there's a blatant difference, you're driving a base model Honda Civic versus a GT500. Okay, yeah, the GT500 should win every single time unless the guy falls asleep behind the wheel. But if you're driving two comparable cars, it's going to come down to who can launch the vehicle and get up to speed quickly, referred to as the 60 foot. That's a very, very important part of a drag race. Reaction time, and then actual just your ability to drive the vehicle, shifting quickly, all that.
Fair enough. So what you're saying is it has nothing to do with spinning out of control.
Again, that has nothing. There's no reason why they chose to have him spin out, other than, again, because he looked down, he noticed his top speed was 140. That's stuck in his mind, and then he just screams and spins out.
I think that the spinning out, I didn't notice until it's then explained in a later scene that the problem was that he wasn't fast enough. When he spins out of control and then he yells in anger, I thought that when I first watched that scene, I thought it was because he lost control of the car was why he was so upset. So I don't think it's a very good scene because it doesn't make sense until it's recontextualized later.
Right. Honestly, going back, what I would see this scene as is like, hey, show him tinkering with the car a little bit, hop in it, and he launches and he goes and he times himself somehow, like, oh, I gotta get faster, and then end it. There's no reason to. That shows you that, hey, he really cares about driving his car fast. He's practicing. He realizes there's some sort of issue, and he's mad at himself for not being able to go faster. It would accomplish the same thing. But this scene's often made fun of for the number of times he shifts.
It's only 6, I counted.
Yes, same thing. It is only 6. However, I will throw another wrench in that. Is that model that model Eclipse came with a 5-speed transmission. So if you really want to get nitpicky, he shifted too many times for that transmission.
Okay, fair enough.
But still, it's not obnoxious. Like,
the director wanted as many shifts as possible, and he assumed that was 6. So the next scene is in the Toretto grocery and cafe.
That's a real place, by the way, in California, which is a fun fact. That street in which it resides on is littered with, that's the best way I can describe it, burnouts and tread marks, because people, when they visit it in California, feel the need to do a burnout as a send-off to there. So fun fact about Toretto's.
So I do have some thoughts about this cafe. The cafe is apparently a toaster, and maybe there's a mini fridge, but it was unclear where she got the tuna for this sandwich. She just turns around and picks up a piece of bread that appears to have been laying there and puts some tuna on it from somewhere. She doesn't leave the room, it doesn't look like. So she's just got stuff for a tuna sandwich on the counter behind her.
There's a reason no one likes the tuna there.
So this is where we arrive at our first Technobabble scene. So I will read the Technobabble and you tell me your thoughts. Here we go. It's your fuel map. It's got a nasty hole. That's why you're unloading in third. I'd lengthen the injector pulse another millisec and just tune the NOS timer. You'll run 9s.
See, I'm glad that you reiterated that, because I didn't actually catch what he was saying. I thought he said you'll run nice. I didn't think he said you'll run 9s. Now,
I put subtitles on to make sure I got it right.
Okay, cool. I'm glad to know that then, because that even makes it more ridiculous. He'll run 9s and his Nissan Maxima, everybody. To break that down a little bit, so that's a little bit of tuning jargon. Now, injector pulse in milliseconds is absolute junk. That's not referencing anything. However, theoretically speaking, so when you're looking at a air-fuel ratio table and you're controlling how much gasoline your injectors are putting into your vehicle, injectors are measured. Some people measure them pounds per hour. Other people measure them in cc's, as the amount of fuel that an injector can flow. In simple terms, there's a min and a max. The computer controls how much fuel it's injecting, pulse, cycle length, whatever, on demand. So when you're giving your car full throttle in most cases refer to as WOT, WOT, which is wide open throttle. Your computer's saying, hey, injector, give me 100% of what's available. It might not be 100% because if you theoretically, these guys would have aftermarket injectors that would be overkill for their motor. So your computer says, all right, this injector is this size. I need 60% duty cycle to be able to provide enough fuel to go. And further explaining why that could be an issue, why the car would run like crap. If you have too little fuel, it's very dangerous for the motor. You can run lean, as it's referred to when you're talking about air fuel ratio, and you can detonate the motor and ruin it. Or you can run rich, which just means there's too much gasoline going into the cylinder. Your spark is not strong enough to ignite all of it, and the car will run like junk. So some sort of combination there. The car's not running the way it should because the tune is messed up. So there's some truth in that. The way they delivered it with milliseconds.
1 millisecond is how long they'd lengthen the injector pulse and then tune the NOS timer. I'm assuming he didn't use NOS on his drive over to the Toretto Market and Cafe.
Hey, and again, I'm no expert in nitrous by any means, so please don't.
And you don't have a Twitter handle, so no one can @ you.
So no one can yell at me. So this is perfect.
You can, anybody, if you think Joe's wrong, please send me a email or tweet the show.
And if you care, you probably don't, but that is a S13 Nissan, also referred to as a 240SX, but that looked like it was a body kit, which is the Japanese version, followed by an R32 Skyline. I'm sure you've heard of that. Brian drives an R34 Skyline in the second installment of this movie series. And remind me again, like I meant to write it down a bunch of times when I was taking notes, but what is the guy's name that fights Brian?
Vince.
Vince drives a Maxima, and then the skinny kid, I don't remember his name either, Jesse, he drives a Jetta, if you care to know.
I don't, but I'm sure our audience will.
So there you go.
My other notes from this scene are that Michelle Rodriguez apparently used to be a very bad actress. I thought she was awful in this scene, and I had never thought of her as a bad actress. Usually she tends to be in pretty bad movies, but she's usually the good actor in those movies.
Her facial expressions are horrible.
She's always just sneering, but her lines are so uncomfortable and stiff. I don't know if this was maybe one of her first movies. I think she's much better in later films. I thought she's pretty good in the first Resident Evil movie. She's in a bunch of B movies, but she's usually really good in them.
I'm curious if we look at her filmography. I just need to know now.
This is always my favorite part of podcasts, is when the speakers are Googling things.
Yeah.
I'm not going to cut any of this out.
She beat 350 other applicants to win her first role in the low-budget 2000 independent film Girl Fight, where she was a boxer, and then she landed the role as Letty in The Fast and the Furious.
Okay, so this was her second movie. That makes sense then. She's just inexperienced. It was just weird because I've always thought of her as a more seasoned actor in all the movies she's in. So it was weird going back to such an early role. For this scene, I also have another very 2001 comment. Very jarring to hear a gay slur shouted. In the opening to the fight.
And it's fun, that even goes back to prove how long it's been since I've watched it, because I didn't think that all I remember in my head is him screaming, "Hey, a-hole," and then them fighting. So
maybe you saw a television version that edited it and dubbed over a different word.
Perhaps.
And the last note I have for this scene is that Dom isn't putting family first.
It is funny, and that was just in my head constantly about how that's kind of starting to build up, and this movie even has some other references that I'll talk about.
We'll get to that
as we get to them. Yeah.
All right, the next scene, I only have one note, and that is, I need NOS. 2 tanks if you can.
Because his car topped out at 140, he needs nitrous. So your top speed has nothing to do with how much horsepower your car has. It has everything to do with how your transmission and your drive axles are geared. So him adding more power to his car would not change his top speed whatsoever. You don't want to know what Toretto said. They pay cash, and he wants you out of here. I told him good help is hard to find. So now, you remember too, if Toretto is the biggest person in the racing scene in all of California, And this guy's shop, I forget the guy's name, but him and Toretto are super tight.
I think it's Harry.
And Harry's shop is super tight. Brian at this point has been working there for 3 weeks.
Yeah, if your top customer comes in and tells you to fire the sort of useful guy you've employed for 3 weeks,
For 3
you
weeks.
fire him.
Yeah, you don't do anything and say good help is hard to find. You don't even know if he's good help at this point. He's been there for 3 weeks. You haven't even paid him yet, probably, or one paycheck or something. I know, it's just silly.
All right, next scene, first street race. My opening note is that it's weird that Ja Rule talks in the third person.
It's funny that your opening note was about Ja Rule, because mine was literally LOL Ja Rules in this movie.
And I think I remember seeing some behind the scenes comment that he apparently turned down coming back for the sequel because he didn't think that the movie series was going to take off.
Is that why they had Ludacris instead in the second movie?
Yes,
I wonder.
Ludacris replaced Ja Rule.
That's hilarious. I bet Ja Rule's kicking himself now 9 movies later.
Yeah. So according to the director of the second movie, Ja Rule refused to take the part because he felt he was too big for the film.
Well, again, hindsight is 20/20, right?
All right, so we have our next Technobabble scene for you to review. This is when Jesse gets into Brian's car.
Yes, and he pops the hood.
That's right. So here's all the things that Jesse sees. And you correct me if I'm wrong. I was just assuming that this was a lot of naming random things that you probably don't care about. Like if I opened up a computer and said, yes, I see a hard drive and circuitry.
Basically.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we got cool air intake.
Yep. Which is a real thing. However, and the next thing he references is a turbo, I believe. You can
NOS fogger system.
Okay. Yep. A real thing.
T4 turbo.
Real thing.
AIC control.
Real thing.
Direct port nitrous injection.
Real thing.
Standalone fuel management system.
Real thing. Couple things. You typically don't call a cold air intake anymore when you have a turbo system, because it's not factory at that point. So you don't really have a cold air intake anymore. It's just wherever your intake is. So theoretically, he could put piping a bit lower to suck in cooler air, which is more dense, and that's why people add cold air intakes to their cars. T4 turbo. T4 is the brand of a Garrett turbocharger. Is T4. That's kind of like the model number of a specific turbocharger company. So unless it was literally stamped on the bell housing of the turbocharger, which it very well could have been, I'm not saying it wasn't, there really wouldn't be any way for you to just know that right offhand. NOS fogger system and NOS direct port injection, those are 2 different types of the same thing.
So it'd be like you saying, I see you have a hard drive and an HDD.
Exactly right. and again, Nitrous people, if there's anyone out there listening, can definitely correct me on this, but the direct port is a much higher end version of a fogger system. So it's like you saying, wow, Joe, nice push mower you got there, but also that's an awesome riding mower you're on.
Okay. So it is a lot of naming technical things, and whoever wrote those lines didn't know those were the same thing or different versions of the same thing.
Right. And the standalone fuel management system, again, that's not something that you would just see under the hood.
How about AIC control?
So AIC, and bear with me a second, but I believe that's idle air control valve.
Well, the C shouldn't stand for control, otherwise it's redundant.
Oh, no, okay. So no, the AIC is an additional injector controller. So that is like a standalone fuel management system. But again, that would be inside the car. That wouldn't be under the hood.
And just to be clear then, that means what he said was additional injector control, because he says AIC control. So it's like pin number.
Automated teller machine.
Yes. Correct.
Oh, it's important to note here as well, because it comes up later on, but Dom does say, not a bad way to spend $10,000.
Okay, so Brian has spent $10,000 upgrading this car or purchasing the car. I'm not sure what the implication is.
I would assume, based on them listing all the upgrades and then saying not a bad way to spend $10,000, that they're referring to the total cost of being $10,000.
Okay.
But Anyway, that's important for later.
So now all of the cars go line the streets to set up the drag strip.
Yes, impossibly fast and
Very well coordinated. It's impressive.
super well coordinated. Yeah. And again, California, I imagine this would draw the attention of a lot more people a lot quicker than it actually does. Although they don't really mention what time this is, so this could be in the middle of the night. I don't know.
Yeah, it's unclear. Pizza Hut guy trying to drive through. My first thought was it's weird that the Pizza Hut guy looks and sounds like a middle class dad.
It's funny you comment that. The pizza delivery guy is the director of the movie.
Ah, interesting.
So that was his way to insert himself into the movie.
His line doesn't make sense. He asks what's going on and then immediately yells a slur about street racers, meaning he knew exactly what was going on.
Exactly what's happening.
So then they spray paint a starting line, but it's only about 2 feet away from a street line that was perfectly straight. So I'm not sure why they spray painted their own starting line.
To have evidence from the police show up, duh. Why else would you spray paint a starting line?
Brian turns on his car, turns on the center console, and there's a three-axis bar chart. I'm curious from your expert perspective, what does that represent?
So theoretically, I believe they were trying to represent fuel maps. But why you would have that on a screen, why you would try to be looking at those while you were actually racing, like at that point, that's saying, I'm about to eat this cake, so I better review the recipe. No, it's done at that point, my man. There's nothing you're going to be able to do at this point. So I don't understand. And the tables on his laptop too, those were also like a couple graphs. My guess is as good as anyone else's what those were trying to represent. But again, someone in the production felt the need to say, okay, look, he's got a bunch of stuff on his computers that he knows everything about his car.
In your expert opinion, are the tailpipe flames while in a parked position a directorial visual choice, or are those accurate to real life?
Many people actually do that. It's very popular now, and that's become more popular probably because of this movie. But you can actually tune your vehicle in such a way that it dumps enough fuel after the injection ignition cycle so that fuel gets passed into the actual exhaust so that it does ignite and then your car can shoot out flames.
Okay. Does it affect performance at all?
It makes your car much more likely to break. in most cases, yes. It's also extremely dangerous because fire outside of the engine is never really a good thing. But
so what you're saying is serious street racers like Dom probably wouldn't do that.
Serious street racers don't actually drive their cars around. Serious street racers show up with their car on a trailer to one other person because they do not like that person, and it's more about grudge and everything else.
It's about respect, as Brian said.
Somewhat, yeah. It's about, hey, I built a better car with my own two hands in my shop than you did, and you talk a lot of and I'm going to shut you up. And sure, they race for money and stuff all the time, but also don't forget to turn on your nitrous system as they all do. They make sure their bottles are open and ready to go. I don't know why Dom would feel the need to hide his in his seat. That seems to be a gigantic waste of money because clearly nobody has any issues with running nitrous. So him hiding little tiny bottles underneath his seat that you would have to have custom fabricated to to hold is just an unnecessarily complicated system.
Agreed. I was going to ask a question, but I think you answered it already. I was going to ask why speed is so regularly attributed to people instead of their cars, but I think you answered that. The comment is when Dom is ahead of everybody and Ja Rule says, man, that guy's fast.
Yeah. Again, I think that's just silly as he's the one driving the car. I don't really have a good answer for that. Like, man, that car's fast would be the better thing to say. I don't know why they say, man, that guy's fast, but that is a little silly.
Then my question was, how bad is Brian that he uses both of his giant tanks of NOS to barely catch up to Dom, who hasn't used his NOS yet? Assuming it were possible to use 2 tanks of NOS.
Assuming it were possible, that means his car is ridiculously underpowered for the race that he's in.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
So maybe not a great use of $10,000.
No. Yeah, no.
We have another I was gonna say this is another very 2001 moment, but actually, it's like an extreme version of our last comment on something being very 2001, and this is a white girl dropping the N word on a black guy. Really took me off guard, and I was like, "Wait a second, this movie's PG-13. Our culture has changed a lot in
Yeah,
20 years. That just 20 years ago was totally fine."
yeah. Apparently, 2001 was a lot less PC than it is nowadays.
Yeah.
So,
All right, so we've now arrived at our third Technobabble scene. It's not as long, and again, I don't know anything about cars, but this one sounded more reasonable to me. So tell me if I'm wrong. This is Dom being mad, or not even being mad, simply refuting Brian's claim that he almost had him.
yep.
Granny shifting, not double clutching like you should. You're lucky that 100 shot of NOS didn't blow the welds on the intake. Now me and the mad scientist are going to rip apart the block and replace the piston rings you fried.
Let's restart this and back up and go one at a time, so I can explain each one in detail. So I don't forget all of them.
Okay. Granny shifting, not double clutching like you should.
People don't do that anymore. So to understand what
Did they in 2001?
No, double clutching is only necessary because older vehicles, and I'm talking like 70s vehicles with manual transmissions, they did not have the same synchros that newer modern transmissions have. So when you were going to shift, let's say you're driving really fast from second to third gear, your car might simply not allow you to go into gear because there weren't synchros to actually put those gears together, or you would just grind the transmission very, very badly and potentially damage the transmission. So what people need to do is in between gears, let the clutch out, and you've driven a manual vehicle, so you can understand. When you go to shift, a double clutch would be I push the clutch in, I put the car into neutral, I let the clutch out, I rev the engine further to get the engine speed more to match the transmission speed. I push the clutch back in, I shift into the next gear, I let the clutch out.
So definitely wouldn't be possible to do the like shift that this
Yeah,
movie
no,
is representing. We're talking about an old car where you're taking time to shift.
right. People will still sometimes double clutch when you're trying to slow down an engine brake without being jarring. So it's more of like a comfort thing nowadays, but nobody would be double clutching, especially in a drag race. It makes no sense whatsoever.
Okay. You're lucky that 100 shot of NOS didn't blow the welds on the intake.
Yes, which again directly goes back to the point of if he did have a direct port injection, which they say that he did based on inspection of the vehicle, the nitrous isn't even going into the intake. So he's talking about a very simple way to add nitrous to your vehicle would be to drill a hole in your intake and stick the actual nitrous injection port directly into there. So the same channel that your car is sucking air through, you're now spraying nitrous through it as well on command, whether it's a pedal actuated switch or a button switch, which it is in this movie for dramatic effect, I believe. That's where you're blowing nitrous through. So theoretically,
What if you had a NOS fogger?
no, that's not the
Because
fogger.
remember, he has both the direct injection and a NOS fogger.
He has direct injection and a fogger. That's referring to the best comparison I can have is, have you ever used essential oils before?
Sorry, no, I'm not. I'm not a stay-at-home mom.
I know it's a big jump, but the fogger system would basically atomize the material a bit more.
It's still being injected at the same point of the process that you just described.
Theoretically, unless you're an idiot, which none of these people presumably are because they're all pro street racers.
I do
But
think they think Brian is, so maybe that was their theory.
so perhaps if he installed it at the wrong point. But yeah, so he's referencing, hey, if you put the nitrous in the wrong place or you're using too much of it, you could literally blow up your intake manifold.
Okay. Last thing is now me and the mad scientist are going to rip apart the block and replace the piston rings you fried.
No way of knowing that without disassembling the motor that you fried your piston rings. You could assume that based on a compression test, which would take you removing this one or more of the spark plugs to actually check compression on the vehicle that you blew the piston rings. But yes, theoretically.
All right, so I'm going to insert into this Technobabble list something that we missed from earlier, and that is danger to Manifold.
Shut up.
Followed by the floor panel on the passenger
So
side
yeah,
falling out
I
and dragging on the ground. What is that?
so what
Tell me, as a vehicle expert, what
what
was the manifold?
what they're trying to reference is that some way the computer system that he has knows that he's putting too much power through his motor. I'm assuming. So they're saying danger to manifold. What manifold are they referring to? I don't know. There's an exhaust manifold and an intake manifold on every single vehicle. So theoretically, his computer program knows there's too much pressure in one of those and it's going to blow.
Which one of those is under the passenger side
Yeah,
floorboard?
good question. Which one of those is on the crosshatch replaced metal with a bunch of green and blue bolts that fall out before the panel falls out? I don't know why. Again, that's what
Again,
happens.
this just is more evidence that Brian isn't very good with cars. He installed the
Clearly,
manifold
clearly
on the
inside,
passenger floorboard.
and it blew apart. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's another perfect example of people saying, "Hey, you know, it'd be really cool if his car fell apart while he was driving it." How do we do that?
Lots of
Aw,
sparks.
lots of sparks, and the thing falls out. Okay, cool. But side note, piston rings fried. If that happens again, you lose compression in your vehicle. Your vehicle, depending on the extent of it, would be severely down on power. Just remember that.
Okay. I'll remember that. So my next question is, why is everyone freaked out about the cops? So just put yourself in the shoes of anybody who's here watching this thing. The cops show up. What are you guilty of? There's only 4 people
Exactly.
who were street racing. So nobody else who's there should be freaking out at all.
Nobody else is there.
Worst they would get is a ticket for parking wrong because they parked
Plus,
at an angle and blocked a street.
yeah, but plus the race is over at this point.
Right. Nobody is racing. There's nobody. If you listen to the scanner that the guy's listening to, I believe the dispatcher says we've heard reports of street racing,
Yes.
implying the cops have not witnessed anything.
Nope.
So
Exactly.
why is everybody freaking out and driving away?
It's silly. And yeah, so street racing reported, that means 30 cop cars show up with a helicopter.
Literally 1 second after street racing has been reported.
You're right. That's absolutely ridiculous.
Second question for this police interaction. How did the cop know Toretto? From like 50 feet away, driving really fast, he spins around and yells, Toretto, freeze.
Well, and even furthermore, why would it matter?
Right. Do they have outstanding warrants? It's not like he's been hiding.
Oh, yeah, he's walking down the street. You can't prove anything just now. You could, I suppose.
If he's hiding from the cops, why did he walk down the street? He was just in a parking garage. Just stay there until the cops are gone.
That was the bigger thing I wrote down from that, is that he made the cleanest getaway possible. Nobody saw where he went. He could just go sit in that car for 30 minutes, listen to some tunes, which he has a great sound system in because he turned it on right before the race.
Also,
But
if the cops know who he is and they are looking to arrest him, why don't they just go to Toretto's Market and Cafe and pick him up there? Like, they should know how to find him.
it's his name. It's right there. That's where he lives, so he has to.
So the last comment I have noted for this very long scene is when Brian is driving Dom and they're weaving in and out of the cops. So in a matter of 2 seconds, he steers between 2 police cars. So he's going slow enough that he can turn twice. He turns left and then turns right as he drives between the 2 police cars. And it doesn't show his car skidding. So he's going slow enough to make controlled turns. And then literally 1 second later, he's going fast enough to get 3 or 4 feet of air.
Well, the car is super fast after having fried the piston rings.
That's right.
So, it overheated, fried piston rings, and it's just, it took everyone else, or at the end of that race, they arrived back to the main group of people and were out of their vehicles. And then Brian is here limping along, doing like 5 miles an hour, slowly pulling up with his car spewing smoke out. And now the car is driving just fine, super fast, does not have a hole in the floor pan anymore where Toretto is clearly sitting. But
No, you just missed that Dom was holding his feet up the whole time.
well, Yeah, he's Flintstoning it, you know. But how nervous is Dom when he's driving with Brian, Mister Pro Street Racer, super
Well, he's
awesome?
come on, you're a good driver. You tell me you don't get nervous when you drive with someone who's not very good.
I suppose, but like again, I just wouldn't think that would scare Dom at all. But it does, obviously. So
Given his opinion of Brian, I think it was a fair reaction. So then they drive to the biker gang's hideout or territory and get escorted to their hideout.
we,
I thought Brian used all the NOS, but then the car explodes in a fireball of NOS.
couple things. So the first thing is, so the reason why are they supposed to be Yakuza? Or they're just an Asian gang? And
I think they're just it's just a guy who's a street racer who has a bunch of friends.
so let's go with that. But yeah, and they're mad, so they decide to shoot the vehicle a whole bunch of times. And by the way, nitrous is not flammable, so could potentially the vehicle catch on fire by shooting it a bunch of times? Maybe, but it wouldn't explode in any other different fashion than.
So you're saying it wouldn't explode into a blue fireball of NOS?
No, that that was added simply because they thought it would be awesome.
Brian asks what the deal is with the biker gang. Toretto says it's a long story and then proceeds to tell the story in two sentences.
Two sentences. Yep. I slept with his sister and it was a business deal gone wrong, right? Yeah.
Then Brian mentions that they have a 20-mile walk. How far did Brian drive him?
Evasive maneuvers are necessary.
Or is the implication that they had the street race like 19 miles away from where Dom lives?
Good question. But also, that was supposed to be a quarter-mile race and lasted, I think, like a minute and a half or something like that. So, they were
true.
going.
I'm not sure why he said you owe me a 10-second car. He meant you owe me a 90-second car.
That took a lot longer than 10 seconds. They were going 140 for a good 10 seconds of that race because they were enough to both look down and see they were going 140 and then continue pushing their car even harder. But we're nitpicking here. So
our next scene is the discussion at the FBI safe house. I only have one note on this, and that's just that DVDs are very 2001.
Yes. And this is back to why I said hold a thought on not a bad way to spend $10,000, right? Brian, that was an $80,000 vehicle you destroyed.
But he spent $10,000 upgrading it, I guess. So wait, what kind of car was it?
It's a Mitsubishi Eclipse.
And how much would that have been? Let's assume he got it brand new in 2001.
So late 90s, that vehicle was out. So brand new, mid 20s.
Okay. So they're suggesting that. So I guess this is just more evidence that Dom is right, and Brian doesn't know anything about cars, because apparently Brian spent about $60,000 upgrading a car, and he only got about $10,000 worth of upgrades for it. Any other thoughts on the FBI scene?
Oh yes, I did have a thought on one of the comments. He says Mishimoto ZX tires, so we know they're street racers. Nobody else can buy performance summer tires. They have to be a street racer.
Well, I mean, I was thinking about buying those, but the sales guy at the tire store told me,
"You're not a street racer.
You're not a street racer. Get out of here."
It's so silly.
Yeah. So we skip to the garage. They are working on the new car that Brian has provided.
He pulls the demolished Supra up to the garage, right? Which, again, these are all high-end street racers, and they're in the game, right? So they're very, very knowledgeable people and all that. And they're upset he pulls this up. And he says, no. Check under the hood. Pop the hood. And Jesse opens the hood, and he exclaims, 2JZ, right?
2JZ engine.
Correct. That's the only motor that came in that car, number one. It did come in a non-turbocharged version and a turbocharged version, but it's still the same. He says 2JZ. That's, if you didn't know or the audience doesn't know, that's the engine code. Every vehicle manufacturer has an engine code for engines, but all Supras have 2JZs, at least of that model, the 93 to 2002, if I'm correct. Supras all came with 2JZs.
So what you're saying is the scene could have been, are you kidding? Wait, pop the hood, pop the hood. Whoa, this has an engine.
It still has a completely demolished and useless engine that we'll have to rebuild from the ground up. Yes, you're correct, Brian. Good job. It, that would have been in my mind. It would have been better for him to say, "Hey, I got a car. Let's go take a look at it." And they all walk out and see this Supra. Man, you found a Supra? Yeah, that's what we're gonna build. Man, this is great.
We get an additional techno line here. Coney adjustables will save about 2 pounds and give better traction for the whole shot.
He's referring to the type of suspension on it, and Coney is a brand. Theoretically, Coney weighs less than some other performance brands at the time. 2 pounds is negligible. Nobody is worried about 2 pounds on your overall suspension weight for components that collectively probably weigh upwards of 100 pounds. 2 pounds is very negligible. But he's talking about a better whole shot. He's referring to launching the vehicle from a dead stop. That's what people call out of the hole, or from a dig, as some people call it. They should have referenced something on, hey, these are adjustable, so we can really make our whole shot better.
It sounds like they were at least in the right neighborhood with the language.
Well, and again, I think
someone may have done an internet search.
the guy that's in charge of all the R&D for the vehicles, super smart guy, and he was very much into the scene himself. He had plenty of very fast foreign vehicles, and that's why they chose him for this. But they basically threw all of his research out the window. Like, he's like, here's my research. This is what you guys should say. He had lines written out line by line of what they should say, and they're like, no. So it's actually frustrating to talk about and to realize how bad some of these lines are.
Well, our next scene is going to have more of those lines to talk about. But first, at the Toretto cookout, I would like to know your thoughts on Vince's mesh tank top.
Yeah, that mesh tank top is something else. I think Vince was a little ahead of his time on that. So he got yeah.
He was partying last night. He didn't get home, so he just came straight to Dom's for a cookout.
He forgot.
But he wears it in basically every scene for the rest of the movie. Then he's wearing that same tank top. Very weird. Very weird fashion choice. Very 2001.
Whoever's in charge of the visuals really wanted to point out that the street racing crew is a ragtag group of misfits that dresses risky, or I don't know what they were trying to show, but yeah.
All right, so we get the prayer by Jesse, and it's all Technobabble. So I'm going to read it off.
Yep.
Do you want to do one at a time or the whole list?
You can do the whole. Do one at a time again.
Okay. Direct port nitrous injection.
Yep, real thing.
4-core intercoolers.
Again, real thing.
Ball bearing turbos.
Real thing.
Titanium valve springs.
Also a real thing.
So they didn't say the word, but I have to say this dinner scene was pretty family.
Yes, very much so.
Yep. Last note I have for the cookout is simply about their planned date. And my question is, maybe this is revealing too much that I'm a parent of young children, but who the heck goes to dinner at 10 p.m.?
Crazy people.
I can understand if you said you want to go out for drinks, but they literally go to dinner and appear to eat a meal and describe the date as fine dining, candles, tablecloth. Who does that at 10 p.m.? I'm hungry by 6.
I just enjoyed this scene because how upset that would make any real person. Like, hey, Vince wants this to be his girl, right? And he's been bugging her for so long to go to this restaurant. And she's like, hey, Bob William, what's the name of that restaurant again that you really like? Oh, this one? Yeah. Hey, you take me there.
Yeah, Vince technically starts it by fighting with Brian at the beginning of the movie, but man, are they mean to him the rest of the
really
movie.
mean to him. Well, and again, Vince did, to be fair, walk into the kitchen after the cookout and call Brian. He basically tells him to go wash his car afterwards since he's washing dishes, and talks about him being a woman. Essentially, he's making derogatory remarks towards women and calls Brian a woman. So that makes, which I can't remember her name. What's her name? Mia. It makes Mia upset. I'm like, you're an idiot. So, Vince,
One other thought I had, and this is just showing how long it's been since I've watched this movie, because this movie is 20 years old. But I couldn't get over how young they look, particularly Mia. And I
Oh yeah,
remember watching this movie thinking that they were my age or older than me, because at the time I was definitely younger than them.
right.
But now I'm looking and thinking, wow, these people look like they're in high school.
Yep. At 20 years, man, it's crazy. And I saw
I
this
might cut that
movie.
out. This is just me complaining about how long it's been. It's
I
20
I
years ago.
I
And
never
I think of them as old people and they look like
I
kids.
never seen this movie in movie theaters. So
Yeah. All right. The next scene is Brian spying, looking for the three civics.
yep.
I only have one note on this scene, and that's another list of technobabble, unless you have other comments first.
I don't know. This scene, I thought it just shows that Brian's really bad at being an undercover cop. Like he couldn't think of something better to say. He really didn't even answer Vin Diesel's questioning when Vince is pointing a shotgun at him and he's screaming that he's a cop. He doesn't even say he's not. He doesn't try to say anything else. He's just, I can't lose, so I'm gonna go spy on everybody.
Yeah, I didn't think that Brian handled himself very well. He certainly didn't seem like he was capable of doing the job that apparently he was assigned to do by the FBI.
Absolutely not. So again, they could have written that a bit differently to have a higher perceived level of competency on Brian's part, for sure.
Agreed. So the technobabble, these are three civics that Brian has found that have spoon engines.
Brand name of manufacturer for Honda parts. So theoretically, I don't know if this is fact or not, but I would imagine that they sold an entire engine build of some sort. So
Okay. With T66 turbos with NOS.
again, they're just saying the type of turbo that he ordered to put on the car, and he also ordered nitrous. So yes.
And Motec system exhaust.
Again, Motec's like saying, "Hey, I bought Folgers coffee." It's just a brand of exhaust.
Okay. So, but that's the extent of what Brian gives as his answer. And that convinces Dom that he's not a cop.
Hey, man, they bought lots of stuff for their cars, so I'm not a cop. Cool, bro. I mean, you were at Harry's. You're the one that sold them the parts. So why are you in this garage, my man? Like,
So Dom believes him apparently, and immediately then they go on another spy adventure.
to Johnny Trans.
I didn't make any notes on this scene. It was fine.
Like, I feel like the only point of this scene was to prove that Johnny Tran is an evil person, which,
It was to make you think that he's the culprit that Brian is looking
oh,
for.
fair. Good point. Okay. Also, so techno jargon, you might have missed it. He talks about, hey, look at this. My car does not have any motor in it. Where's my engines? A couple of SR20s will catch a premium the week of Race Wars. Now, you wouldn't know this unless you're a car nerd like myself, but SR20s are Nissan engines. It's like saying you have an all AMD motherboards and then talking about Intel processors.
Could he hypothetically be talking about people who have Nissans but without SR20s?
I don't think so because he in that same scene he talks about where's my engine, and then he's like, "Well, did you sell them to somebody else? A couple SR20s would catch a premium the week of Race Wars." So like,
Right, he's talking about selling it to somebody else who has a Nissan but doesn't have an SR20
right,
engine.
but then why bring up the whole fact that he's missing his engine? Like, hey, here's my Honda. I'm missing an engine in it. It doesn't have an engine. Look,
Oh, they were Hondas.
right? Yeah, all the
Okay, I missed that part. You didn't say they were Hondas. That's the part I missed.
well, got it.
So you're saying Johnny Tran was trying to install SR20s in a Honda
Theoretically, yes.
for the great power gains.
What? Why? So I again, this comes down
Look,
to
if you could get an Intel processor into an AMD motherboard, you have
would,
no idea what would
wouldn't you
happen.
want to? Wouldn't you
No
want
one's ever
to?
done it. You don't know what would
Oh,
happen.
it's silly. It's again, that's somebody in the production studio saying, "Hey, SR20s are a hot tuner motor. We need to throw that in here somehow. And here's the perfect thing to do it." No, it's ridiculous. Honda had so many great motors, and they still do have so many great motors that are way more popular than the SR20s in the tuner world. That you could say, "Oh, my D16 or my B16 or whatever." There's so many different things they could reference, and it's just silly.
Next scene is the engine building scene back at the Toretto garage.
Yep.
I only have one note, which is another technobabble. TR7 with a ball bearing upgrade. Gonna spool up really quick.
Again, I'm not even going to pretend to know what size turbo that is, but they're basically saying, "Hey, Joe, I'm putting this size turbo on my vehicle, and because of that, it's going to spool up faster than a different turbo." Yeah, great.
So basically, he's saying a nice turbo.
Right. Yes.
Okay. Next scene is the backstory scene for Dom.
Mm-hmm.
I thought this scene was great.
You got to understand there was a reason behind him beating the gentleman with the torque wrench, and he wasn't just some crazy dude who beats people with torque wrenches.
Right. It supports Brian's view, which is that
Right.
Dom is sensible and calm and wouldn't be the kind of person to do something foolish like hijacking trucks. I thought Vin Diesel did a great job. He's a really good actor. I think we know that from other things he's been in, but he hasn't been in the kind of high profile acting roles.
Sure.
I thought he was great in this scene.
Yeah.
It really highlighted for me how little backstory Brian has.
Good point.
Brian's the main character. He's the protagonist. I don't think we know anything about him. We don't even know his real name until the movie's mostly over.
Right. Yeah, I mean, really, at this point, you know he's an undercover cop, and he's trying to bust Toretto.
And you know he's bad at driving, but really wants to be good at it.
Yeah, you know.
So anyway, I thought they did a great job writing Dom's character. I thought that it then makes it even worse how poor of a job they did writing Brian's. All right, so my next note is the biggest twist, the most shocking plot twist that I could have imagined, and that is that the only time in this entire film that the word family is uttered is not by Vin Diesel, but it's by the cop. There's all kinds of family, Brian. You got to choose which one.
Right, well, and I'm glad you said that, because what was he trying to say there? Was he trying to urge Brian to side with them?
I have no idea.
I was so confused when he said, like, wait a minute, does he know that Brian's, like, falling for this family? Or, like, I don't understand what he was trying to tell him there.
This is after he accused Brian of going native. I'm not sure what his intention was with that line, but it almost sounded like encouragement to see Dom as family and look after him. We then get the movie scene of 2001.
More than you can afford, pal.
We get a guy in a 2001 Ferrari. We have Brian with his glorious blonde curly hair. Dom and Brian both wearing their Matrix sunglasses. And then Dom utters the greatest line in possibly all of film history, but at least for the year of 2001.
Smoke him.
Smoke him.
It was a cool scene. I enjoyed that. It also shows you how much of an idiot Brian drives and is super willing to win.
You'll notice that in this scene, this is where Dom gains respect for him.
I guess, you know.
Any more comments on their lunch getaway?
No, you know, I kind of liked how Brian brought up the fact and just called out Dom in this scene. Is like, look, I know you're full of it. You're saying you're making all your money doing these tune-ups, and you guys don't do a lot of tune-ups, so you're making money, and I want to be a part of it somehow.
You know, that's an interesting observation. I wonder why Brian didn't notice that, given that he's a detective or wants to be a detective. He's been arguing this whole time that it can't be Dom, and yet he then makes a very reasonable argument why it probably is.
Yep, absolutely.
So we arrive at Race Wars. I don't have many comments here. The only comment I have until we get to the finale is that it's a little weird that everybody apparently has exactly $2,000 in their shirt pocket.
I love it that you made that comment, because I wrote down the exact same thing. Too large. Everyone carries around $2,000 apparently.
Yes.
So, you know, $2,000, just a big wad of
in cash, so you can pull it out of your shirt pocket
in cash with at least one $100 bill on the outside, because there's no way that all those are $100 bills. So that stack would not be that thick. So you put the fat one on the outside and make it look like you got more money, and you're just ready to race for $2,000.
Despite the fact that everyone carries $2,000, you still have to tell people that your bet is going to be $2,000.
No, too large.
Too large, correct. All right, so we get to the hijack scene, the action climax of the movie.
My biggest question in here, and maybe I just missed it, but like, why are they pulling this one off in broad daylight?
I think that makes sense because they said they were tracking this vehicle.
Okay,
So
so they're
they must have had a specific location they needed to take it in, and they knew where it was going to be, when it was going to be. Convenient that it could be during the daytime so that you could see the action better.
number two. At nighttime, they're all wearing masks and covering up their identity very well, right?
Right.
So in daytime, they decide not to do that all of a sudden.
Yeah, well, now the audience knows who they are, so there's no need there's no need to keep it secret. No more mystery.
Exactly. And the police made reference to this earlier on. They're saying, "Hey, now the semi truck drivers are prepared to defend themselves." Right? That doesn't mean you can murder somebody who's trying to rob your semi truck.
Well, this is why the police were trying to solve this case soon enough, because they didn't want a bunch of murders happening.
A bunch of vigilante murders happening because of semi truck drivers.
Although I would question, it depends on the state you're in. And this was in California, so probably not. But I know in a lot of states, if someone is trying to break into your car, you can use lethal force to defend yourself. And I know in almost every state, self-defense would be defined reasonable belief that lethal force was about to be used on you,
He
and
shot a
he
grappling hook
shot a
into my truck.
grappling gun at his truck, shattered his window. I think the truck driver is fairly safe in assuming this guy might kill me.
So then why doesn't the truck driver use his greatest asset that he has,
His giant truck.
his gigantic truck, to ram these little civics into oblivion? Which he does later on. He does smash Letty off the road,
He
but you
does
know,
later on until the action scene needed him not to.
right? It's this one. This
Let's not
scene.
get into the specifics of the action yet, though, because I have one more overall comment, which is this really, going back to your comments about the fact that this is during the daytime, they're no longer wearing masks. This is even more out of character for Dom, because this film has portrayed Dom as being a sensible, strong and aggressive when he needs to be, but he's a smart person.
Right.
So Brian argued that it didn't make sense for him to do the clever nighttime secretive heists. It really doesn't make sense for him to be leading this daytime, no masks, out in the middle of traffic
No,
and everything.
you would be seen. You would get caught. You're blowing your whole cover for what? You can't. Dom would know that everybody would know that this isn't nothing's gonna happen here if you can't get the merchandise and sell it. If you get caught, you're done.
Yeah. All right. So into the specifics of the scene. So my first specific comment for the heist is that the grapple gun hooks on the upholstery of the passenger seat. And apparently he pulls himself into the truck by a grappling hook hooked to fabric.
To his, which is hooked to his belt buckle. Pure.
Is it just a safety
style.
line? I wasn't really clear as to what the grappling gun was for,
I don't know either, because
other than to get wrapped around his arm.
Well, because he jumps from the Civic to the semi, so presumably, yeah, it's a safety line, but I don't know.
How is that going to keep him safe?
Good question.
So Letty says that she's going to distract the driver. She drives her car in front of the driver. She says, "Come on, boy, shot doesn't get better than this," and then is immediately outraged and surprised that he shoots at her.
Yeah, doesn't make a lot of sense.
My last comment or concern about this scene is, how the heck does Dom keep pace with the truck when he loses his tire?
None of it makes any sense. Brian was 40 miles away from these guys, and this whole heist is happening at highway speeds, right? It's like 60 miles an hour. So is Brian maintaining the difference of, I don't know, like 120 miles an hour the whole time to catch up to them?
Yeah, it sure seems like.
I how did you make this happen this quickly? I don't understand.
I think he found the best way to spend $10,000.
Nos. I didn't like the helicopter scene. Like, why are there no police there? So a medevac helicopter shows up, but police don't. That doesn't make any sense. I feel like there'd be a police confrontation right then there, because Brian calls the whole thing in.
Right. When Brian calls it in, the other cops should immediately know and be sending a police helicopter. Remember, they had a police helicopter 3 seconds after the police dispatcher said, "We've had reports of street racing."
Right.
Surely they could have a police helicopter when Brian, the undercover cop, calls in the heist.
Plus, too, why is Brian helping load him to the helicopter? He doesn't know what he's doing with a helicopter medevac. It's just, odd is all. And that they could have ended the scene with the helicopter landing.
There was a lot of extra detail unnecessarily.
Yeah, it didn't add anything to it. It just made more questions, if anything. But
So I only have notes on one more scene, and that is the revenge chase.
yep.
And I just have two questions. First, how many bullets are in those guns?
A lot.
A lot. This is where people are getting the wrong idea about assault weapons
Yeah.
that you can just pull the trigger on and bullets come out endlessly.
Scenes like this. And that's Johnny Tran and Johnny Tran's like main henchman, right? That
Yeah.
kill
So
Jesse.
that's my second question is, why is Johnny Tran and his main henchman doing the drive-by when they have a crew?
Right. You
If
get
they're only
some
going to send two people, don't send the top two people.
you would get some nameless goon to go do it. You're not going to have Al Capone out doing a drive-by. It makes no sense.
No sense.
But yeah, that bullet spray though, when he turns around and shoots at the Supra as it's chasing him down, he's literally making like a gigantic circle
Yeah.
and spraying bullets throughout California. And somehow it doesn't hit Brian's car once. You
Yeah.
think like, hey, have him spray bullets across the windshield, something, like, whoa, it's tense, they don't. I don't know why they didn't have any bullets hit his car, but
Brian couldn't afford to damage another $80,000 car.
yeah. But did the police station didn't pay for it this time? Toretto did.
That's true. Toretto paid for the whole thing.
Whatever.
Anyway, I thought the final chase with Dom was fine. I thought it was really weird how it suddenly transitioned to awkward digital slow motion that looked like a 2001 music video.
Yeah, so let me ask a question. Why did they race?
Because when the light turns green, I'm going for it.
Because Dom lives his life a quarter mile at a time.
Nothing else matters.
Does he realize Brian's going to arrest him at this point? Because Brian didn't say anything to him. Like Dom's off away, sitting in the middle of an intersection with no other cars around, somehow revving his engine like an idiot. And Brian's like, "Oh, time to race."
Also, if Dom's trying to get away from Brian, he does realize that just winning a quarter mile race doesn't mean that you've gotten away. It just means that Brian's a couple lengths behind you, still in pursuit. But you know what? He lives his life quarter mile at a time. He'll worry about that when he gets there.
Again, I know why this race happened. This race happened because it's the Fast and the Furious, and what better way to end the entire movie than on an old-fashioned quarter-mile race, again, versus the two main characters. Brian lost the first time versus Dom. Is he going to win this time? What's going to happen? Nobody knows. It's a tie. Whoa, cool, awesome. Brian's a sweet street racer now. He's finally beaten Dom. But really, why did the race happen?
I liked that Brian let Dom escape. It was the smallest glimmer into the character of Brian O'Connor.
Yeah, like, hey, now, again, that kind of goes back to the cop's comment of him choosing which family he's going to support, but they don't really reference that back again. So it's kind of open-ended comment that, like, okay, Brian's decided now I'm going to give up my entire life for these people for some reason.
Yeah, it was a weird ending. The visuals changed dramatically. The weird slow-mo felt like the director wanted slow motion but forgot to use the right camera. And so they just did it with computers, but this was 2001 when they couldn't do it as well with computers.
Yep.
Yeah, disappointing. I thought it was a disappointing ending to a pretty good movie.
It's an entertaining movie, and it definitely, I can see why it launched the franchise. I don't know why it launched 9 of these movies, but
I think we're going to eventually do all of these movies, probably not all in a row because I will get sick of talking about family, but I don't think this movie launched 9 movies. I think this movie launched the next 2.
Fair.
And then I think the 4th one launched the rest.
In conclusion, Fast and the Furious, are you glad you watched it?
Yes, I am glad I watched it. It was kind of refreshing to watch it and realize it was actually a pretty good movie. I've had negative thoughts of it for so long, and it's been probably over a decade since I saw it. I think I was remembering the second one. So then watching the first one again, Actually,
Oh,
it's a pretty standard crime drama. It's not a Scorsese crime drama, but it's a decent crime drama. It's a
sure.
PG-13 crime movie that happens to have some street racing awkwardly shoved into it. And I think that eventually the franchise figured out that the street racing is not really what's interesting. It's the crime drama slash car action.
Car action. Absolutely. And
This movie
again,
did really well with car action. I thought that was great, and it did really well with the family character drama.
yeah, it's just it's a silly, doesn't take it well. I think it does at times take itself a little too seriously, and that's when we run into some of the boring parts with dialogue and poor character development. But all in all, it's a goofy, entertaining movie.
So ultimately, I would say I was disappointed with this experience because we were hoping to discuss another bad movie because those are fun to talk about. And this wasn't a bad movie. So next time, we're going to pick an actually bad movie to watch. We're open to suggestions for this coming episode and any future episodes. Send us some bad movies or some good movies that you think would be entertaining to hear us discuss.
Please, we've seen a lot, and our list is way too large for either of us to easily choose. So we would love some suggestions on what to talk about.
And if anybody has any suggestions for the podcast in general, should I talk less? Should Joe include more car technical details, even if we're not watching a Fast and Furious movie? Let us know. What did you enjoy hearing? We'd love some feedback. Thanks for listening, everybody.